Welcome to This Humean Life with the Philosophical Coach. I'm thrilled to have you tuning in. I'm your host, Sam Kukathis, aka the Philosophical Coach, philosopher, Hume expert, and high performance coach. This podcast is designed for you to go from being the passenger in your life to the owner of your life. It is designed for you to go beyond who you know yourself to be, really. If that intrigues or excites you, then you are definitely in the right place. The ideas are drawn from neuroscience, philosophy, my coaching practice, working with elite leaders, and experience. You can expect candor, humor, vulnerability, and ideas which are unfamiliar to you, and some you may just plain disagree with. You'll also get the opportunity to hear from inspiring coaches and leaders. Now let's get ready to question what we know and go beyond our limitations. Welcome back to This Humean Life. Today, we'll be looking at how to lead with authenticity in both your professional and day-to-day life. And to help me facilitate this conversation, I have Neelu Kaur with me today. Neelu Kaur is a corporate facilitator, leadership and NLP coach, and stress management specialist. She has 15 years of experience specializing in adult learning and leadership development in large organizations. She's a certified yoga instructor, Ayurveda specialist, and an Ericksonian-trained hypnotherapist focused on bringing mindfulness and stress management practices to individuals, teams, and organizations. Neelu, thanks so much for accepting my invitation to be on the show. And before we dive in, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Besides the bio that you just read. Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Neelu and my work is at the intersection of leadership and wellness. So how I work with individuals and teams and organizations is through two avenues. One is through group facilitated classes, and then the second is through one-on-one coaching sessions. And the topics range from mental health, mental well-being, stress and burnout management, all the way to, managing your manager, things that are required to go from an individual contributor all the way to a leader in an organization.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's so relevant to exactly what people have been dealing with this last two years. So I feel like this conversation is going to be right on point.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think the way we want to make this conversation is both offering something which has some theory behind it, but also is going to be practical. So there are things you can take away from this. And looking at this conversation around authenticity from a context. And what I mean by that is that within life, we have different ways in which we approach any situation. And there's a way in which something will occur for us. And there are different contexts which can either empower us in that situation, or it can and enable us, or it can be something which disempowers us and leads to all the experiences that have been so common in the last 2 years. All the burnout, all the anxiety, all the overwhelm. So we want to offer a context which could create an opportunity for you both to be able to see how you can bring authenticity to your life within your personal lives and in your professional lives, and also to see where maybe you're relying on a context which is actually providing you the opportunity to stay in a place which you don't want to stay. So to kick this off, so we're going to look at traits which are brought in from this idea of conscious leadership. And there are 4 distinctions that are present here. And the simple way of thinking about this is this idea of choosing something. And I choose this versus is happening to me. And in the conscious leadership space, the way they describe this is this idea of by me versus to me. So before we dive into what it looks like, Neelu, maybe can you talk us through what you see and how you would explain that to someone who's never heard that distinction before?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. So by me, through me, to me, by me, through me, and as me are the 4 states of consciousness. And that comes from Michael Beckwith's work at the Agape Institute. And then conscious leadership has taken it and used it in organizations and with individuals they coach. And so what it really means is when something's happening to you, you're sort of in this state of victim consciousness where you feel like the external environment is dictating your current situation, versus when you're in a more by me state, it's like you have agency and ownership over what's going on. And so the tools, the techniques, sort of the thinking about it through the lens of authentic, being who you are and changing your state of consciousness from more of a victim consciousness to a more proactive agency is on you, and you're the one that's in charge of your destiny sort of consciousness.
Yeah, that's super clear. And I think it's one that pretty much all of us could relate to at some point in time, that there are moments where we find ourselves in that victim, that mindset. And if we haven't had that sort of personal development journey, there might be more times as they're not, then that's the way that life looks is, and whether we're present to that as a victim mindset or just who we are is going to depend on, what's going on for us at that moment in time. So when you're trying to work with someone around this distinction and they haven't already, aren't familiar with it, how would you go about getting them to see this distinction for themselves?
What's interesting is I use this and it comes straight from conscious leadership. So I want to give credit where credit is due, but they use this framework called the drama triangle, in which you play the three parts, which is the victim, the hero, and the villain. And I actually have these cards. So when I'm working with people, I have them either print out the cards or use the cards. And when we're speaking, I ask them to take, it's a spatial reframe. You're standing up and you're stepping into the hero, the victim, the villain, right? And it's like when you are actually aware that you're doing this, you realize even those of us that are aware that we do this, we probably go into victim more than we think we do, right? So it's just this idea of seeing in front of you what you're actually doing makes it illuminate really bright that you're actually falling into a victim mindset more frequently than you think you are. And that actually helps people. That's like the first step for any change, is to assess where you currently are. And until you become aware of it, you don't know that you're operating from this place of constant victimness.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's like you have to uncover what people aren't seeing before there's any opportunity for them to see anything new.
Right. And language plays a big part, right? Like how we speak to ourselves. And so when you start to realize the words that you're using, you're realizing, oh no, I'm falling into a state of victim consciousness and I need to now be more proactive.
Yeah, I was actually watching a video of yours around, I think it was imposter syndrome. It's like a very short piece on YouTube. And it was looking at different volumes around being an imposter.
Yes. That actually comes from NLP, which is what I'm trained in neurolinguistic programming, talking about the way we communicate, not just with others, but with ourselves. And we have these, in NLP, it's called submodalities, and volume is one of them. But also, when you have this inner critic, where is the inner critic? Is it next to you? Is it above you? Is it below you? So you can play around with these dials. And I actually use that same premise with authenticity. When you're in a certain place or certain organization, that you have this dial, like the Sam dial, and Sam can turn up certain things when he's in financial services and things down when he's in tech, right? So we know what we can do and what we can't do. And it's like having sort of an image or a metaphor that you use can be really helpful when you're facilitating or coaching people in different industries.
Yeah, that sounds to me a little bit like seeing what's appropriate within the context in which you're working.
Right. Reading the room, knowing in financial services, I cannot say XYZ. In tech, I can be a lot more, boisterous and loud and, whatever it is for you. But the idea is that we all have this dial and we have agency and power to turn up or turn down certain aspects of ourselves, given the audience that we're connecting to.
I'm just thinking out loud here from the context of leadership research that I get to do. And one of the things they look at is this idea of where have we created there are fixed ways of being and acting which aren't available in certain contexts. So even when you're talking about this idea of in tech, there's a certain way you would operate, and finance is a certain way you would operate. I wonder if you're creating a way in which there is a limitation on how you can be and act in those particular environments based on past narratives of what's appropriate in those environments.
So you're saying we use past data, we have biases based on industries that we've been in, and we're using that past data to dictate how we are in the present moment.
100%.
And so are you saying that's a good thing, or are you saying that's a negative thing? Or you're just saying
it's neither a positive or a negative. It's more, it's a limitation. It's a limitation of what leadership can look like inside of that space.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I very much agree with that. I think more so than industry, it's more about reading the room, because you could have a room full of tech folks, which happens for me a lot, but those tech folks might be new into tech. They might come from different industries. So you just never really know. So it's all about your audience and really catering to who's in the room and being able to read the room properly. Yeah.
No, I'm on board with, because it's a constant case of looking and seeing what, if the context of communication is this idea of making something happen where the other person is, it's about, okay, what's happening out there or out here where they are, rather than what's going on over with me, with all my, thoughts about how am I speaking? Am I presenting? Are they getting it? All that kind of, normal rubbish that we have as human beings. So that's the case of like, if I'm over where they are, then there's an opportunity to impact them. But if I already have a preordained view of what it should look like, then the opportunity is limited.
Right. And I think as leaders, right, like using yourself as an instrument is really important. So I think I'm drawing a blank on the author of this work, but it's surfacing the invisible. So it's almost like calling out what you're experiencing physically. So if you're feeling a little unsure about your messaging because you're in a different audience, it's almost like be overt about it and share that with the audience, have them give you more insight and feedback into what they're feeling and thinking. And then it's this like you're co-creating an experience together as a leader with your team.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that gets to this idea of candor, where
yes.
it's if you are unwilling to really share what's going on over for you, then are you limiting what space they can create for themselves or what's appropriate for them to bring to the table in that environment?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's really about calling out not just what you're thinking, but what are you experiencing somatically and physically? Because if you have knots in your stomach and you're really tense, your audience will mirror that. Right. So there's so much research about mirror neurons. And so it's like just calling out what you're experiencing helps the audience relate to you in a more authentic way as well.
Yeah. I saw Rich Litvin, who, for those who don't know, is a very well-renowned coach, working with someone one-to-one recently. And he was just talking about like all the energy which had been going through him and like, all this transformation that he and that participant had been working on the last 3 days. And he just wanted to acknowledge it and then like let it be, run through him. And so like he let out this really audible like sigh, just so he could then get present again to that conversation. And I was like, oh, that's like a great way to just be really authentic about, okay, this is what I see as present for me right now. And before we kind of proceed, like I'm gonna share this so that I'm actually able to be with you.
Right. And it's almost like tapping into that wellspring that he tapped into and cultivated days before. And he's bringing that and anchoring that experience in the present moment with whoever he's coaching.
So I'm interested, if we took that idea of really candid leadership, what difference do you think it would make? And what do you see stops people from actually having that level of candor in the first place?
I think that it all boils down to, and I know this term we use too much, but I think it boils down to imposter syndrome, and everybody experiences it, no matter what stage, what part of an organization we are, what our title is. It's the idea that I have to be the smartest person in the room. And so if I'm not the smartest person in the room, people won't follow me as a leader. So I think it boils down to that, but I think that stops people from actually being authentic, saying, you know what, I actually don't know the answer to this, or I'm experiencing so much uneasiness in my body around this topic. I would love to hear what you all are thinking. So I think it all really stems from this need to be perfect and this need to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, that reminds me of something Simon Sinek would say about when he would go to these events or go to conferences. He would ask what would you might see as dumb questions, because he's curious about understanding something which he doesn't necessarily know about, and that actually gives him a chance to see something about what's missing and what they're already doing. Whereas if you come from I already know all this, then there's really no opportunity to discover anything. But at the same time, there's all these other people in the room who have these questions but are afraid to ask them because they're afraid of how it might look.
Right. And, sometimes I've noticed the questions that are asked elicit your brain to come up with amazing answers. So it's almost like you want people to ask questions and you want them to be curious. And if you don't know the answer, oh, okay, you're not supposed to know everything, but it might jog your mind to come up with some great ideas and sort of, again, co-create an experience together.
100%. Like, if you have everything planned out and you think that's just the way it's going to go, then at some point in time, the uncertainty of life is going to kick in, and you're not going to be able to deal with the circumstances because you're going, oh, it hasn't gone the way it's planned. Now what?
And I think structure actually gives you freedom. So it's like you have a skeleton, you know what the agenda of the meeting is. You're very methodical and intentional about what you want to create and the outcomes, but there's still room for flexibility and for things to come to fruition while you're in the meeting or in the gathering of whatever sort it is.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Without any structure, it can be, you haven't got a clear intention, which is being set for what is, being created. But if you have too much rigidity, then people feel constrained within those boundaries and feel like they can't say certain things or can't create certain things because it's not in the confines of what is being said.
Yeah. So I'm actually a big fan of really being intentional. And I use a lot of Priya Parker's work in The Art of Gathering in terms of helping leaders understand like the agenda and creating a very specific plan of action and then desired outcomes, but then also, being flexible, reading the room, seeing where things are going and seeing what needs more attention than what you might have thought. So coming in with an idea and a structure, but then really being open and free to see what happens in the room.
Yeah, no, that speaks to me as well. Like the work that I've been trained in is all around like you create from the intention, and what matters is, has the intention been fulfilled? It's not about like, have I said everything which I, expected to say on this some sort of sheet, or, that's not the way. It's the question, have I fulfilled this intention? And if we came from that rather than this rigidity approach, then you may have more of an opportunity to lead in a way which works, rather than feeling constrained by, have I, met all these different KPIs or whatever it is that you have in mind that are a constraint for you.
Yeah. I mean, I can say as a facilitator, especially during this whole Zoom world that we've come into, it's that, I have a show flow. I know exactly what's happening each minute of the time that I have with this group of people, but it's also really good to just step away from that and say, okay, this is not, let me read the room and see where people want to spend more time. And that doesn't align with my show flow and it doesn't align with my content, but it's about making sure that everyone gets what they need in that time together.
Yeah, 100%. And then again, that's such an important aspect of leading, is really seeing what's needed rather than just doing what you think you should do because you said you were going to do it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, like the dynamicness of leadership, I think, is something which we don't maybe necessarily talk enough about. In leadership, we speak about this idea of VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I think the main crux of it is this idea of there's a volatility in what it looks like to lead and an uncertainty which is constantly present. And if you feel like, it has to look a certain way in order for it to work, then you're going to be stumped most of the time because there are so many different circumstances which are going to arise, which are unexpected. And you're going to then be in the world of excuses about why you didn't make something happen. Because it's like, oh, but this happened now. Now, you're at the whim of circumstance, which is the classic victim mentality.
Right. Absolutely.
I had something recently where I've been waiting since June 2021 to have the final version of my doctorate returned by my supervisor. And despite my persistent communication, there was no response. And when I made clear that I was looking at my next steps with Oxford, if the work was not returned, he responded. And when we spoke, there was so much resistance on his part to giving a time to complete the work because it simply wasn't going to fit into his schedule. He simply looked at what he was dealing with rather than leading from, what have I already given my word to in virtue of my role? Nor was he showing any consideration of the massive impact on me having to wait to complete a piece of work, which is not directly related to my profession. And when he didn't meet the deadline, he said other things came up unexpectedly. It was a classic case of creating an excuse and justification from operating from what's going on with you internally as a human being, which, to be clear, we're all susceptible to and have done. And what this looks like is you try and defend yourself rather than just get. I made a promise. I made an agreement. I didn't keep the agreement. Now what? What happens is your story gets in the way, which in this case is the fact that you had other things come up in your life. I'm sorry, that's simply called being a human being. Thanks very much for sharing that. But what are you actually going to do about what you actually have made an agreement to do? The supervisor was basically out of contact for months and months and months. And after 5 months, I finally created some agreement that he would get the work back to me. And there was a squirminess to it in the sense of just like being so resistant to giving a time. And because it was just like, that wasn't going to fit in with his schedule. He hadn't created a way in which this could work. And then when he didn't meet the deadline, he was like, well, I had all these other things which came up unexpectedly. And it was like, right, that's the classic mode of creating an excuse and justification, which comes from operating where what's going on with you internally as a human being is then what you rabbit out onto a page where you try and defend yourself. And this is what people constantly are doing. They're trying to defend themselves rather than just get like, I made a promise, I made an agreement, I didn't keep the agreement. Now what?
Right.
It's all the story which gets in the way, which is like, okay, that the fact that you had other things come up in your life is called being a human being. Like, thanks very much for sharing that. But what are you actually going to do about what you actually have an agreement to do?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like being honest about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just being honest about what's going on.
And that's where I think candor comes in at another level. And that's that ability to be straight with people. You can be straight with people in a way which honors them. It doesn't have to be disempowering. Because you don't add story to the conversation, but you also hold people to account for what they actually agree to. And I think too often we're afraid to do that. And, if you'd asked me like a few years ago, how would you communicate in this situation? I would have been fearful of what I would say because I am a PhD student. This person is a, professor. So therefore I'm in a power relationship where I don't have the ascendancy. But in this situation, I was like, no, like, how would I be, if I'm being a leader, how would I operate in this context? Well, I'm going to hold the person to the agreement. Because if I relate to this person as who they are, as their word, this is what the core of integrity is about, then I have a responsibility to do that. I'm not giving them an opportunity to lead if I just say, oh, that's fine. Thanks very much. Yeah, get it to me when you can.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I don't think I could say anything more to that, but I absolutely agree that it's really about being honest and going back to that sort of candor. It's definitely ties directly into being an authentic leader.
Where's a situation, Neelu, where candor has really made a difference in your leadership?
Yeah. I mean, I operate from that model. So I'm trying to even think of a specific scenario where it's like, oh no, that really helped me out. I mean, I really just call out how it is. And I am a very direct person in general. And I think many of my clients appreciate that about me. It's one of the things that, I don't sugarcoat, but then again, I also know, I really know my audience and I know reading the room. So where I can be very direct, I can be very direct. If I'm working with certain types of people, if I have to, tailor it a little bit, I do that. But I think it's constantly checking in with myself and understanding, like, is this a bias that I have? Is this something that's going on with me? Is this something going on with this person? And then I just ask, instead of making up stories, I will say, I'm thinking this. The story I've made up is this based on what you just said. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, brilliant. Because it's the interpretation that we have so often, which actually creates all of this miscommunication.
Right.
So by actually calling out, like, this is what I hear, this is what I'm interpreting, like, what's actually so.
Right. Exactly. And also just, like, I have a specific example that just happened the other day was that I reached a previous client reached out to me and they said, oh, we want to do some workshops for 2022. What are your thoughts? And we talked through some things. I created a proposal. I sent it to her and I didn't hear from her for days. Meanwhile, she was really, really saying, please get this to me right away. I want to circulate this. And I didn't hear from her. And so then when I reached back out to her, I was like, I just want to hear your thoughts based on the proposal that I sent to you. And she kind of blew me off. And then I wrote back and I said, is this something that's going to occur in 2022? Or are we tabling it? Like, I just need to know so that I'm not left with sort of this question mark. And I think because I operate that way, the other person feels comfortable to be very direct with me and say, yes, we do want to do this, or no, we're not going to move forward with this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that mirroring of the relationship. You're how would I put this? Yeah, you're creating an energy where they're going to either show up in the way that you are, or they're going to just say no. Like, there isn't going to be like a fumbling around and pretending, and no, like you've given them an out, or you've given them an opportunity to say, yeah, I want to do this.
Right. And, when you think about it from an energetic perspective, it's like, how much energy do I want to utilize actually questioning what's going to happen versus just finding out? And then I can use that energy and take that with, and focus that in another way, and focus that on, work that I'm doing in other groups or work that I'm doing for myself. Right. So taking that energy and really using it elsewhere is 100%. What I'm all about. Yeah.
100%. And I think that really speaks to actually where burnout can start to happen, because people spend so much energy trying to interpret situations rather than just being candid in the first place, which would then create an opportunity to like get clear on what's actually so, rather than all the interpretation you've created about a situation and then all of the noise that is going on for you, and then others are creating the additional noise. The amount of times I've heard of organizations, just the ineffectiveness that they operate from because of all the noise that they're creating and all the gossip that happens inside of it, rather than just having really straight, candid communication.
Right. Absolutely. So I was working with a client last week, and he was responsible for this document. And he said he put over 200 hours into this document, and he was so burned out. And I said, okay, that sounds like a lot of time that you put in. And so that's a lot of time. So I acknowledged that. And then I asked him, during those 200 hours, did you check in with the person that you were responsible, like who's holding you accountable for this document? And he said, no. And I said, well, here's where burnout starts. It's like, you've gone down this path. You've spent so much time. What if you just added in some frequent check-ins to make sure? And so we can actually be very proactive about burnout in just over communication, checking in, right? Maybe we don't need to put 200 hours into this document. Maybe we need to put 40, and it's going to be pivoted in a different way. And then we're going to have to do something else. So really, I think we can be the change agent for ourselves for burnout as well.
Yeah, 100%. Like if we've created a belief that this is what it has to look like, and I have to do it all on my own, and then we're wondering why I haven't got any help and why I'm experiencing burnout, then we're essentially in a victim mentality without even knowing.
Right.
This is happening to me. I'm experiencing burnout.
Yeah. It's like, woe is me. I spent 200 hours. I didn't get to hang out with my kids. I didn't get to really do anything on the weekend. And not to say there's nothing that statement is not true. Those statements are true. He didn't spend time with his kids. He didn't get to take walks in the park. But maybe if you would have had, regular check-ins, maybe you didn't need to spend 200 hours on it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%. Like we create a belief around what something should look like and how much time it's going to take.
Right.
And once we create that belief around how much time it's going to take that much time, or it's going to take longer.
Exactly. And what if you said to the person, I really have been working on this and I'm working on it for a really long time. I just want to check in with you to see, like, am I going down the right path? I don't want to spend more time on this if it's not what you need from me. Yeah.
No, for sure. Because most of the time, if you're writing something, it's going to have revisions anyway. So better to actually start to see like whether or not what you're actually doing is effective than thinking that what you're going to produce is this perfect document, which is going to be untouched afterwards. And that's the end of it. That's the illusion.
Yes, that is the illusion. And I know this because I just finished a book, and I just had an editor who helped me sort of in this process as well. And I just signed with a literary agent. And so there's so many things going on, but it was really about, constant check-ins with the editor, making sure that I was on the right track.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And I think this is advice that people can really take on no matter what field they're in, because it's something which is going to show up for everyone,
Absolutely.
Given the frequency of something like burnout. It's like looking at like, where am I unwittingly creating this from a place of I'm a victim in this situation?
Right. And if you're a leader and you're supposed to know it all, you're not going to ask and you're not going to overly communicate. But if you come with curiosity and say, I don't have all the answers, I'm going down this path. Is it even the right path for us as a team, as a group?
Yeah. And not needing to know everything is really powerful, because that's when there's actually an opportunity to see something.
But, when you're a leader and you're hired into an organization, you come in with a C-level title, right? You feel this need to really add value immediately. It's like, I'm getting paid XYZ. I need to add value immediately. And so there is this bit of like, there needs to be action taken and very action oriented versus like, okay, let me sort of look at everything from a bird's eye view first before I could dig into the weeds of it. So I think there's a lot to be said for, even during COVID, there was a lot of turnover. Many people left their jobs and are leaving their jobs even now. And so these, leaders are coming into different organizations, and there's this added pressure. You're being onboarded virtually. There's so many different aspects going on. And the premise is still the same. It's like, come in with curiosity and more in a state of openness and to see what's actually needed.
Well, I think I'm curious here what you think, but if we look at this in terms of authenticity and the way we onboard people, and it's a case of managing the expectations of what it looks like to start a job, because imagine that you're in a C-suite job and you go in with all these ideas of all the actions and things you need to change without having a proper understanding of the foundations of the place that you're in. And then you're starting actioning off all these different things that need to be done. And then it actually leads to all these ineffective results because you're doing things from a place of needing to prove something rather than looking, is this actually what's required? Is this actually the most efficient, mode to actually produce the result? Or is this inconsistent with the intention? Is it aligned with the values of the company? Whatever it happens to be, which you're not going to be an expert in when you first start. No matter what reading you've done, you're not going to know what it looks like until you're there itself and had a chance to get your hands around the levers and dials, as some people say.
Yeah. And, it circles back to the comment you made at the very beginning, which was having that bias. Like, let's suppose you were in a tech job before and you start in a tech company. Again, you're bringing in with you the things that were needed to be fixed there or the certain challenges there, but those might not be the case in this new company. So going back to what you said about having these biases and bringing them forward is something to be aware of.
Yeah. No, like if we could come in to a C-suite level position with a beginner's mindset, but with the ability to elevate our understanding and get up to speed much, much faster than someone who's obviously, had less experience in this kind of world, then what would happen, I wonder, in terms of our performance or our ability to actually be effective in leading?
I love that. I mean, I use that. I always have that as a guideline for my workshops. One of them is beginner's mind, but it never occurred to me to use that same frame for someone who's coming into a C-level job. I think that's amazing. And I think, yeah, it's absolutely needed and required. And it goes against the grain of like, oh, I'm being brought on, I'm making $300,000. I need to, do X, Y, Z right away. It's like, no. Yes, you were brought on because you have the credentials or the performance, right, to back you up. But there's a beginner's mind that's required for you to really understand and assess the environment that you're in.
Yeah. For myself, like when I was working in a consulting environment, it was a very unusual environment. And one of the pieces of advice I was given is don't think until you know what you're thinking about. I had no idea what that meant, but it gave me a sense of how abstract a world I was going to be entering into and how I needed to come in from a place of not knowing and just be willing to listen and to look and to see what was needed. And, when you start in that world, you have no knowledge of what's required because you have no idea of what the intention is, what the foundation of it is. You just have an idea of what you think you're getting yourself into. And if you brought that into your role, I have an idea of what I think I'm about to do. But do I actually know? And if I don't, how would I approach my job differently as a consequence of that?
I love the quote. So what was the quote again? I think that was like a mic drop moment. What was it?
Don't think until you know what you're thinking about.
Yeah, I love that. Don't think until you know what you're thinking about. Yeah, absolutely. That goes right into sort of coming in with a fresh slate, beginner's mind. And yes, you have all this experience, all of this wisdom behind you, but really coming in with sort of like a fresh palette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. And then that's where there's opportunity for transformation as well, because you're not coming from your default context of I already know and I already have to prove something. I remember getting told, Sam, you're never going to be able to prove something to me. And I was like, oh. And I realized then, I was like, wait, I've just lived my life from this, since I was an academic, trying to prove something, prove that you're smart. You're not going to prove something to me. So you can either keep trying or you can see and what's actually required in this job.
Yeah, I love that. And that, I think that's a perfect tie into sort of authentic leadership. Personally too, right? Yeah. Like personally, it applies just as much like in our personal relationships.
So I'm curious, when you say that, what do you see around that?
Just what you just said about the idea that I lost my train of thought, but the idea of, can you recap what you just said?
Let's see if I can recapture what
I know. I just lost my train of thought. It was like so bright and shiny, the idea about how we could use the same premise in our personal lives. It's like we come in with these biases of previous relationships or whatever the case may be. And it's like being present in the moment and saying, this is a new person I'm with, or, this is a new day and this is a new situation with your husband, wife, partner, whatever, and really coming in with sort of from this place of curiosity and authenticity.
100%. I think that's the key word when it comes to personal relationships is curiosity. And it's looking at like, where am I trying to prove that I'm this great person to someone?
That's it. That's it. We were talking about proving. That's it. Yes. That's where I was like, oh, that's so true. Because in a relationship, you're constantly proving that, I'm a good husband, or I'm a good wife, or I'm a good partner, or I'm a good parent, or I'm a good, right? So you're constantly thinking like, I have to prove this to others and to myself.
And then what do you avoid as a consequence of that proving?
Say more.
Well, in the sense that like, if you're constantly in a space of feeling like you need to prove something, then it's likely that you're going to avoid certain things. You might not be candid with people because you don't want it to come across the wrong way.
Right.
You may not be, expressive with your feelings. You may just withhold certain information. Like for me in my relationship, no matter what, the core and foundation of it is to never withhold anything. If I feel like I'm about to withhold something, I feel it in my body. Because I've trained myself now to the point where like I see that as something which is inconsistent with who I am and who I stand to be in the world. So if that's the case, then I'll have a conversation with her, no matter whether it's a difficult conversation or not. Because it'll just stay in my body as a sort of stuck energy, and that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, and what's interesting is in conscious leadership, they talk about accepting where you are and at full accountability. So if you are withholding for, let's say there's something you want to share with her, and you decide you're not ready to share today because it's Monday. But maybe you'll feel differently on Tuesday, or it might take you till Wednesday. The idea is that you take full accountability and responsibility, that you're willing to be with the consequences of withholding for a day or two, or whatever that period of time is. But it's like, not just waiting for the opportune moment, but knowing that you're doing that and what the positive benefit is or the disadvantages, but taking full accountability for that withholding.
Yeah, 100%. Like dealing with the fallout of
right.
And the fallout sometimes is for yourself.
Exactly. Because you might hold that feeling of dis-ease in your body for 2 days. And that's your choice because you're choosing to do that, right? So then we're circling back to sort of that victimness, right? Like if you are going to do this, being fully aware that this is your choice, that you're withholding from her for 2 days, and then you're going to talk to her about XYZ.
Yeah, and I think this is something a lot of relationships can struggle with, is the really being able to have these kind of candid conversations, because they're afraid of what's going to happen if they do. The person's going to leave me, or they're not going to like what I have to say, or something wrong is going to happen. And so rather than actually think, imagine we had a foundation which is already strong enough to survive anything, so long as we're going to create it from a place that we never withhold. How would I then, approach this question of whether this is a too difficult a conversation to have?
Right. And I think leaders now are going through the exact same thing because there's so much mobility, so many job opportunities. There's a sense of fear. Like if I say this, this person's going to leave the team, and they have other options for them. There's so many other options out there right now. So there's it's a parallel process, right? Like thinking about how this applies to leadership as well as our personal lives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing is, when I think about leadership, I think it's really easy to think, oh, leadership is only something which applies in your job.
Right.
And, I think of it as a context for how you live your life. So
100%.
How can I be a leader, at home with my kids, in the social, field, whatever it is that I happen to be doing at any moment in time, what does it look like to be a leader in this moment?
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that a lot, and I often, whether I'm writing a blog or on a podcast, or even just with thinking about leadership, it's not just leading in organizations. There's so many different forms of leadership. You can be the leader of your family. You could be the leader of your religious, community. You can be the leader of I was the leader of a walking group during COVID in my neighborhood. So, we show leadership in different ways. And the idea is that it's transferable. How you are in one situation is how you are in a different situation.
And I think it's important to kind of, for people to get that it's not limited to this professional context, because it takes away the excuse that they're not a leader, which I think a lot of people have beliefs around, I wasn't born to be a leader. I'm not naturally a leader. I don't have leadership capacities or whatever. And there's research to suggest that from like the age of 5, we've already kind of ingrained in our brains whether or not someone is fit to be a leader or not, based on the kind of default way in which we've seen leadership, which shows how bankrupt our thinking about leadership. We're associating with a sort of power and aggression and all these sort of other attributes, which have nothing to do with effectiveness in this realm. So if we can really get, there is a world of leadership which is well beyond this professional setting, then those who think of themselves as effective leaders might actually start to listen and question, are they actually effective leaders, or are they just good at their job?
Right. And if we leverage Ken Blanchard's situational leadership work, a good leader also knows when to be a good follower. Right. So we've also, with the way we've defined leadership, is sort of like making the decisions, taking that authoritative view. But a good leader, a transformational leader, also knows when he or she needs to be a follower. And I think that's something that applies in all situations, professionally and personally.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Can you give us an example of what that might look like? Because I could imagine that might be abstract for some people as to how you be a leader and also be a follower.
Right. So let's say you're a team lead and you lead a group of software engineers, right? And you're like, I'm the one that's making the key decisions. I'm the leader here. When you know that, yes, there's a huge deliverable we have. I need to make the decision for this to go live. However, if there might be situations where other engineers are coming in with bits of information and they have information that's going to impact your key decision, right? So it's like knowing when you have to take sort of the backseat and let one of those other people come forward, giving them a voice, right? And having inclusive leadership, which is letting the underrepresented people have their turn in the front of the table, right? So it's really about knowing when to be a leader and make the decision, and also knowing when you can take a step back and let others come forward with their ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, and as soon as you shared that, what it reminded me of is just how the problems a lot of CEOs can often have, because they feel like they need to be managing every single situation. They need to be leading from the front in every situation. And then the teams can experience a lot of micromanaging as a consequence. They don't feel trusted to be able to actually deliver. And so as a consequence, you have a situation where you have dissatisfaction at the employee level because they don't feel trusted. Then you have dissatisfaction with performance at the CEO level because they're wondering why their team aren't producing the results that they're expecting, because they're not seeing that they don't feel trusted. So they're not actually having the opportunity to lead.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I had another thought that came up and then it disappeared. I have so many bits of research. Like I see my brain right now, just like lights just turning on, these like neurons firing. And it's just like, there's something that you said that I wanted to reply to, but it'll come back to me.
Yeah, no, that's our memories are a fascinating thing. The way that there are different, like I think the short-term memory is like 30 seconds or something, that we could withhold something unless we use it. And then, and obviously there are ways you can increase that memory, but yeah,
now I remembered. As you said that, I remembered when you were saying what you were talking about with the leading and following. It's like, even the example I gave, what would it look like today in today's world if the leaders, so oftentimes what happens is most of the leaders in different domains of organizations, they all look the same. They all, it's like an echo chamber of leaders. Like they all are, cheerleading for each other because they all speak the same, they look the same. So what would it look like for those leaders to start delegating to others that bring in a diversity of voice, right? Like a diverse experience, giving opportunity for others to shine and to be leaders. I think that's sure. For me, that would be like that's leadership.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, I think there's a massive push right now on exactly that front. To if you can bring diverse voices forward, then you're going to be having a seat at the table in terms of the conversation which is going on right now, rather than whatever's been happening in the past. If you can't get on board with that, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah, it's like knowing when you can pass the mic over to someone else who's not used to carrying the mic or holding the mic, and almost mentoring them so that they feel comfortable holding the mic, and then they can say what they need to say, which is usually valuable. It's like many of these people who are not speaking up, it's because they haven't been given the opportunity to speak up.
Yeah. And then as a consequence, they can hold on to their own kind of beliefs, which limit them about like, oh, I don't have anything valuable to say and contribute. And
no one wants to hear me. Exactly. No one wants to hear what I have to say. I'm just the software engineer. I just do my job. And no, you're doing the job. So you probably have more insight than that leader has. Right. So it's like, that's the time to speak up when you feel like you have value to add.
Yeah, no, it just makes me think about like, what would our politics look like if we came from that position? So not just the people who are like briefing the politicians, like actually, this is an opportunity to create something in the world which actually makes a difference, rather than here's a 30-second spiel about this issue, which you now are going to rabbit on about in the media. Like, no, like, how can I create something where this is going to shift the way this person sees the world or this issue, such that they're going to now take the time to learn more about it and actually, facilitate it or, be a driver of change for it.
It's interesting. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'm sure you do as well. And I love when there's like this discourse and talking, but I also love actionable items. Like I walk away knowing like, hey, I can start doing X, Y, Z. So if we could co-create sort of like an action item list for people listening, like what would you think that might look like for our topic, which is authentic leadership for professional and your personal life?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to look at what is the default context that you have about a particular situation. So if we're talking about work, like what's the way that you see it right now? And wherever there is like the biggest kind of constraint that you experience, what's the context there? Because that's where you want to start. Because that's where you're going to create the most resistance to that situation, and you're going to have the most, it's going to have the most impact on you.
I love that. And I would say number 2 might be to look at the words that you use, the language that you use. Are you coming from victim? Are you coming from villain? Are you coming from hero? Right? Like and even if you're not familiar with conscious leadership, even if you just took the victim piece of it, the to me and by me, and you're noticing that you're blaming the external environment for things that are going on, and how can you have agency to change that? That's a great way to start the conversation about whether you're coming from a place of victim.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, I think to continue on this way, I think, and it's related to the context idea, but it's about looking at responsibility from a different lens. So it's common to think about responsibility as something you want to avoid, because the normal the normal way that we've been brought up to think about responsibility tends to bring things like you're responsible. And so then, I'm to blame, or I feel guilty, or I have shame attached to it. And so then if that was how responsibility occurred, you're going to want to avoid it as a natural human response. Whereas if you are looking at responsibility as an opportunity, okay, what's the opportunity I have in front of me? I have an opportunity to be responsible for my experience of the circumstances. We want the wall to be green right now, even though it's white. But the wall's white. No, but I want it to be green. Don't you get it? It should be green. No, the wall is white. So if you can get where you're creating life from a place of you want the wall to be green right now, and it's white, then you'll have an opportunity to see things differently.
Mm-hmm. And then I would say number 3 might be as it relates to candor, surfacing the invisible. So like if you are a leader and you're experiencing something and you don't know the answer, or you're feeling uneasy, it's like voicing that out into the open and having people mirror back to you what they're experiencing, and sort of having a more collaborative, co-creating experience together.
Yeah, 100%, because it cuts off the opportunity for this just to be this long interpretation and long story, which is impacting your ability to be effective as a team.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. So I think we have our 3 things for you all listening who are thinking about authentic leadership professionally and personally. Those are, I think, 3 great ways you can start the conversation with yourself.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think this has been a really rich conversation.
Yes.
And, before I leave, Neelu, how can people find out more about your work and reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website, neelukaur.com. And also I'm very active on LinkedIn. I have Facebook and Instagram also, but I'm very active on LinkedIn, and it's under my name, Neelu Kaur. And a little self-promotion going on. So I'm going to have a book coming out soon called Be Your Own Cheerleader, which
Amazing.
is for Asian and South Asian women to self-promote and self-advocate in the workplace. So that will be on my website soon when I have that information.
I love that. Yeah.
Yes.
We all need to be our own cheerleaders.
Yes, exactly. So hopefully it'll be a movement that I'm creating. But the first step is for women of Asian and South Asian backgrounds. And then hopefully it'll grow and expand to include everybody.
Well, let's take the hopeful out of that, right?
Yes.
You just came from the commitment that you have.
I love that. Thanks for calling me out on that. I love that. It's a movement that I am going to start, is being your own cheerleader.
It's a movement you've already started.
Yes. True.
All right.
Thanks for that reminder.
my pleasure. This is an example of candor.
Exactly. And I love it because you see, I've written a book on it, and I still have to practice that muscle of thinking about the impact that I'm going to have.
100%. We all do. We all do. We're only human.
Yes, exactly. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Neelu. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This podcast challenges who you are really in every area of life. If you want to explore how this is possible for you or your organization, then head over to thePhilosophicalCoach.com.